I think a lot of companies, I think a lot of marketers, I think they know what they need to do, right, to be successful or to create quality content. What I don't think that they have is the focus and the time and the resources to do it. I think a lot of marketing teams try to take on too much, or they spread themselves too thin, or they underestimate just what it takes, to really create top-notch content that can compete in organic search.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the SaaS SEO. So I'm your host, George Casiotis, and today I have a very special guest. I have Ben Seiler from CoSchedule. He's the inbound marketing director. And I'm very excited about this episode because I know CoSchedule for a few years now, and I know that CoSchedule is a very con-focused company. And I'm really excited to be discussing with the inbound marketing director of the company about many interesting things with regards to con. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hi. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So before we dive into the some questions that I have, and before we start our conversation, it would be interesting for our listeners to know a few things about your journey. How did you end up doing what you do today? If you could just let us know a few things about your journey and your background, it would be fantastic as a way to kick things off.
Sure. Yeah. So my professional journey started back in college. I went to school for journalism and PR. My first actual career job out of college was as a content writer at an e-commerce company. So I spent a couple of years there, learned an incredible amount very quickly. And then after that, I went to work at an agency in a slightly more senior writer role. And then just got a pretty good breadth of experience across a lot of different types of content and different platforms and channels for a variety of different clients, primarily in manufacturing, healthcare, and financial services. So the biggest client I worked on there was Bobcat with the construction and agricultural equipment company. And then after I had been there for a little over a year and a half, I got a message out of the blue on LinkedIn from Garrett Moon, the CEO and co-founder of CoSchedule. And at first I didn't plan on answering it because I wasn't looking for a job. I'm kind of wary of cold pitches on LinkedIn in general, because I think we all get too much of it, and you kind of maybe even unconsciously start to filter it out pretty quickly. But then I thought about it, and I was like, if the CEO of a company, like especially here, like a local company, so we're in North Dakota, and at the time CoSchedule was getting a lot of buzz locally as an up and coming company. That was doing some really big things that are maybe somewhat uncommon for a company in the part of the United States where we're located. We're a fairly rural area. So I kind of figured, if someone like that sends you a message, at the very least, you can probably take a phone call, right? So I did, and not too much longer after that, I applied for a content writing position at CoSchedule. Joined the company shortly thereafter, and then after kind of moving my way up the ranks here over the last, it'll be 6 years in December. I am now the inbound marketing director here at CoSchedule.
That's great. Very interesting story. And for people who don't know, what is CoSchedule? What, can you do with the tool, and who would you say gets the most value out of the tool?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So we describe ourselves as a family of agile software products to help marketing teams get organized and do better work. I think in more plain English, our core product offerings are like marketing calendar and marketing project and work management software. That's probably the terminology that's a bit more generic that I think most people would be familiar with what those things are. Um, so for as far as like who can maybe get the most value from the product, I would say any marketer in any company, particularly those working on teams. Um, Generally, we kind of think that our core market is maybe teams of like probably 2 to 5 are probably most common for us, with companies with a head count of maybe 50 to 200 people. But we get everybody from solopreneurs all the way up to people working at Fortune 500s, use our software. So that's really our core product offering. We also offer Headline Studio, which is a premium version of our popular headline analyzer, our headline testing tool. We rolled out a more advanced freemium version of that earlier this year that just adds like a ton of functionality and just really does a lot of things to make it more useful. And then we also have what we call the Actionable Marketing Institutes, our e-learning course platforms. So yeah, I think most people are probably familiar with our marketing calendar and our marketing suite and our headline analyzer, but yeah, we're definitely growing, and I think we have a lot to offer lots of different types of marketers, different products that they might need.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. One of the most interesting things about CoSchedule is the fact that you are competing in a very, let's say, a category where competition is very intense. Okay, and most
Yeah.
of the keywords or the terms that you have visibility for are very hard to get. And I would like to know, how do you deal with competition at the end of the day, and
Mhm.
what do you think are the ingredients of your success? Because obviously we're talking about success here in terms of your organic visibility and so on. Is it that you can't satisfy search intent, or even is 10 steps ahead of what people have in mind when they are conducting a search? Is it amplification through link building, for example? Is it in-depth content, or is it pretty much everything that I just described and even more? I'd like to hear your thoughts with regards to that.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like I think that's a great question, but I think I might not have a very satisfying answer, or at least not a very groundbreaking or maybe surprising answer to that question. Um, for us, I think as far as competition goes, content-wise, I think the biggest advantage that we have going for us is that it's just time. So CoSchedule started in 2013. The blog was launched, shortly after the company was founded. So the marketing strategy has always been led by content. But if you go back 7 or 8 years, the B2B content space was not nearly so competitive as what it is now. I mean, it was competitive for sure, but I feel like it's become much more difficult to stand out in the years since then. But since we had like a head start over maybe some newer companies or some newer competitors, we've had the time to build a domain authority to where it's easier for us to compete on things that are on like competitive topics and competitive keywords. Beyond that, though, I don't think it's just kind of having like the first mover advantage. So which we're well aware of the fact that we have that going for us, but we don't want to take that for granted either, because I feel like if we start to rest on our laurels, it would not be that difficult for someone or multiple someones, to start to eat away at some of that success that we've established. So we have, since the beginning, we have made sure to not lose sight of just like the core values that we expect all of our content to kind of imbue. So for us, it's like if we're going to press publish on anything, we want to feel confident that it's the best thing that we could do on a given topic. And that's difficult, to maintain that type of standard, day to day for years, but we found that that's what it takes. And so we're very clear. And I think over the years, we've just developed a very strong understanding of, what does quality content look like? What does it mean to actually satisfy search intent? And I don't know, just like I feel like I'm really kind of struggling to grasp at a better answer for you, but I really think it just comes down to the fact that we got started at the right time, and we just haven't really taken our foot off the gas. It's we just really commit to just creating the best content that we can, and just keeping that going. And it's worked out really well for us.
I think that this is a perfect answer, but a follow-up then question would be, do you think that at the point we are at right now and the maturity level of the SaaS industry in general, B2B SaaS to be more specific, do you think that it's too late, let's say, for a company to start right now? Just because obviously timing is important when it comes to success for startup companies.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The short answer is no, I don't think it's too late. For a few reasons, but I do think it means that if you are starting a B2B SaaS company right now, you might need to have a stronger focus on things that aren't SEO, at least in the beginning. Because SEO, like there's some debate about how long it takes before SEO actually kicks in, but I wouldn't put all your eggs in that basket. If you're starting out, or just, anyway, like you never should have been, but I think maybe more now than ever, like I would be looking at, well, what can you do in other formats and in other channels that are maybe a bit less saturated. But I wouldn't give up on SEO or content, or like having like a content driven SEO strategy entirely. So I think that we've seen, some signs from Google that, they've made some efforts to kind of shake up the search results a bit. And I think they are making moves toward trying to serve people, or trying to serve users the best content, not necessarily just content that's been published by trusted authorities, or just by like publications or websites that have just been there for years, right? And I think that there's some recognition on Google's behalf that, just because a website is popular or drives a ton of traffic, I think there's maybe some growing awareness on their side that it's very easy for companies to or just for websites or publishers, not just not just companies creating content, but anybody creating content that's successful for a long time. Sometimes like that content just starts to succeed because it's being carried by domain authority, it's being carried by brand recognition, and you kind of see some of like these legacy brands. I don't know if that's like the appropriate word for them, but like the companies that have just been there forever, that their content, the quality starts to decline, but they continue to rank, right? And so I could kind of see, I could see some of that first mover advantage, that even like companies like our own have built up. I could see that maybe slowly being eroded away. Um, and if or when that happens, that's obviously going to create more opportunity, um, for newer players who are just creating great stuff to get recognized for it. So, but I think at the same time, if you're trying to plan your strategy around that, you're kind of banking on being able to predict what Google's going to want or what Google's going to reward. But I do kind of like at least in my view, I do kind of see some signs and some evidence that I think they're going to continue to shake things up in a way that I think is maybe going to make things easier for newer companies, so long as they're willing to put in the work.
Okay, that's very interesting. I would like to shift gears a bit and discuss something that you have done on your website, and that I really like, and it's a top of discussion among con creators and SEO professionals, which is that you have a topic cluster around marketing strategy. And this topic cluster that you have ranks for more than 10,000 keywords and has backlinks from more than 1,200 referring domains, which is impressive by its own. And obviously, there is a success in terms of the organic visibility, the traffic, I assume, that this topic cluster brings to the website. But I would like I would like you to share with us the nitty-gritty, if possible, of the implementation and executional part of that topic cluster, like from topic selection and essentially saying that these are the topics that we are going to include in there. This is how the main page will look like, the hub page, as people call it. This is how we'll interlink between the hub page and the topic cluster pages, as some people call them. It would be nice to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. So that topic cluster has gone through a few different iterations over the years, and it took us a lot of time and a lot of experimentation to figure out like really how to get it right. So the way that the process kind of started, I mean, first was we identified marketing strategy as being a very broad but very relevant topic for us. So we're trying to sell marketing calendar, content calendar software. Well, really, like, and this is a bit simplistic, but what is a calendar used for other than to organize the execution of your strategy, and the planning of the pieces of your strategy that you'll execute. So there's a very strong product to topic, connection, there for us. But obviously, like, we also recognize that marketing strategy that's an extraordinarily difficult term or topic or set of keywords, however you choose to look at it. It's very difficult to rank on. It's very competitive. So that was where the idea came to create a topic cluster or like a content hub, or whichever term you choose for that. And that was something that we had never done before. So the way that we started, I just kind of started breaking down the topic into smaller chunks. Like, if you were going to plan and document and execute a marketing strategy, what pieces of information would be essential for you to have in order to do that successfully? And I think the first time we did it or created that guide, it had 15 or 16 chapters in it. And it was way too dense. It almost went overboard with regard to how much detail we had packed in there. And then there's a lot of things with I don't know, there's just so many on-page things that are maybe kind of subtle or a little bit nuanced, that we kind of learned over time. The biggest thing was that the homepage needed to be more substantive on its own. the first on like our first couple of attempts, like the homepage was really more or less just a table of contents. So we just kind of like blew out the homepage just so that the homepage itself could stand as its own piece of content, even if you did not read the other chapters. Because if you're asking someone to read 15 chapters, that's an unrealistic ask. But so that was like one thing that we learned. As far as like, and then I think like a lot of other things with it though, like once we kind of like figured out the strategy, like what information does it need, what pages does it need to have, what's the best way to interlink all these pages, from there, all you really have to do is just all the same on page best practices that you would normally follow. So it can include statistics, have appealing images and things that people want to link to and that people want to share. Make sure that you're covering the topic, in depth, and that you're not leaving out anything that might be important for people to know. These are not things that I think are a mystery to anybody, but I think that where something like a topic cluster, where a project like that can really start to get overwhelming, because it is kind of overwhelming. It's very complicated. It takes a lot of time and it's a big risk, because you'll throw a lot of time and resources into one thing. And if it doesn't pan out, well, like then what? But you mitigate that risk somewhat because each chapter in that or each page in that cluster individually has the opportunity to rank as well. So you're not so reliant on just one page, right? So we published that originally, I think in like 2016 or 2017, and like we couldn't get the homepage to break onto page one for like when people search marketing strategy or anything related to marketing strategy. But we noticed that a lot of the chapter pages seem to benefit from the internal linking strategy that a topic cluster naturally creates. So we didn't really consider it a failure, because when you look at it holistically, it was driving a lot of traffic and it was driving a lot of conversions. Once we kind of like just developed a better understanding of what a topic cluster going after something that competitive, like what does it really need to be successful? I don't know, that we were kind of able to stack success on top of success just by kind of treating it like an ongoing, like an iterative sort of thing, rather than like we're going to just launch this out into the world and it needs to be successful right away. It's something that you have to have a lot of patience for. But I think also, like in addition to patience, like you have to be able, I mean, with whatever stakeholders you're dealing with, like whether it's a boss or a client or whoever, you have to be very firm in making the case that you are going to need a lot of time to get it right. And I think this is where like I think a lot of companies, I think a lot of marketers, I think they know what they need to do, right, to be successful or to create quality content. What I don't think that they have is the focus and the time and the resources to do it. I think a lot of marketing teams try to take on too much, or they spread themselves too thin, or they underestimate just what it takes, to really create top-notch content that can compete in organic search. So those would be the two things, that I would say is be patient and be aware of how much time it's going to take, because it's probably like whatever amount of time you think it's going to take, like add 20%, because it's going to take time, to get right. I can't even remember. I mean, since we had kind of just been, we fully redesigned it 3 times. We had maybe made light updates to it, in between then, but I mean, if you were to tally up all the time we've put into that topic cluster over the years, and I've never thought about it this way before myself, it's probably like 3 months, more probably. And then for it to really produce like the results that we were looking for, I mean, that was like a year or two, so and I think that by itself is probably enough to kind of like scare people off from trying something like that. Um, but at the same time, I think given everything that we've learned about how to create topic clusters, I think that we could replicate that success much more quickly just because we're better at it now. So maybe that's the last piece of advice that I would share is instead of trying to learn all those lessons the hard way, just ask somebody else how they did it first.
Yeah,
And
that's
then,
that's a good one. That's a good one.
and then, yeah.
I would like to ask, because obviously, as I mentioned in the beginning, CoSchedule is a company that's very focused on con. Okay, and I would like to ask nowadays, after doing con for many, many years, what does your content ideation process looks like? Does it start with a typical, I'm going to open a keyword data provider, I'm going to do keyword research, or it's completely different? And at the same time, I have to ask whether or not you feel that at some point, guys, we're going to run out of ideas, like we have covered everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So for us, like going back, so I joined the company in like December 2015, but like even going back to like before my time at CoSchedule, it's always been a keyword focused or an SEO driven strategy. And so that's always been a component, but the strategy from the beginning was to, I mean, first identify the absolute most important keywords or the most important topics, and then identify the keywords that people typically use to find information about those topics. So for us, some of those terms are pretty obvious, like marketing calendar, content calendar, whatever type of creative or marketing related calendar you could about imagine. But then also, we have, like we have like workflow features, we have social scheduling features, we have some automation features and things like that. And so the strategy is always to identify which topics that people search for that are most closely related to product functions, right? And that's kind of where everything started. And so once we had kind of covered, most of those bases, you start branching out into things that are things that aren't, maybe they're not necessarily directly focused to, or directly connected to what your product does, but they might be things that someone who uses your product would be interested in. And so we kind of started like going after more terms like that. And then that's pretty much it. I think, but to kind of maybe like drill down a level deeper than that, I feel like once upon a time, like our strategy for surfacing keywords was pretty rudimentary. It was a lot of like hunt and peck and just kind of like be like, oh, I wonder if people search for this, and then like typing it into a tool and being like, oh, look at that. There's better ways that you can surface ideas than that. There's like way better just processes and things. But I mean, it really was that simple kind of in the early days. And we kind of carried on like that for a really, really long time before we kind of got a bit more sophisticated with, just with how we go about uncovering keywords that we might want to go after. But there's really not much of a secret to it ideation wise. But one thing that I will say is that we don't publish anything without taking search into consideration, at least not on our blog. We have our podcast, we have some other things that we do where we can kind of get away from that search driven, sort of emphasis. But for us, we're a small team. And so we need to make sure that everything that we publish has a shot at driving traffic. We can't necessarily just rely on publishing stuff that we think is going to resonate with people, which I think is unfortunate. But just from a business perspective, just in terms of the money we put into content versus the money we expect to get out of content, we want to make sure that when we press publish, that piece is going to rank and it's going to get traffic, right? I would like to kind of break that mold a bit more than we have ideation wise, because I think that there's a lot of things that we could publish that, it would make the ideation process maybe a bit more creative, to tell you the truth. But I don't know, without getting on too much of a soapbox or kind of going off into the weeds too much, we really kind of just ask ourselves, what are things that people would find useful? What are things that people need help with? And so if you kind of think about keywords that way, like behind every search is a person with a problem. So we just kind of think about it in terms of like, what problems can we show up with the solution for? And that really drives the ideation process more than anything else.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think that it's clear, like the content that we produce needs to serve that very specific purpose. It couldn't get more clear than that. But a question that I have here is with regards to your editorial calendar nowadays, and I think that I assume that you will be using CoSchedule to, as your editorial calendar. But
yes, yep,
yeah. Do you have a balance between we need to produce, an X amount of new piece of content, but we also need to apply some content updates as well? Is content updating, some people also call it content refreshing, you can call it however you like, but is it part of your process and your standard, creation and content calendar in general?
Yeah, so updating content has always been part of the strategy. But for a long while, the way that we identified pieces to update really wasn't any more complicated than just kind of sifting through data in Moz or Ahrefs, or looking through traffic, reports in Google Analytics and being like, oh, this thing's dropping. We need to update this. And then from there, we always just put a priority on which pieces are, what are the pieces that have the strongest connection to product, and then just emphasize keeping those updated, because those are the pieces that are closest to revenue. And I think that sometimes when people ask this question, they kind of expect there to be maybe an answer it's more thoughtful or more complex than that, but it really was that basic for a really long time. And now, like more recently and like over the years, I've kind of developed just some better methods for just gathering more data to kind of inform those decisions. And just beyond just like traffic and keyword rankings, starting to take impression data and click-through rates and conversion rates and all of those things into consideration, which is a bit easier now because like we have so much content, that when you have more content, you have more data to sort, and then you have more of a need to really prioritize. It was a lot easier when the blog was smaller. And so the process just didn't really need to be as complicated to kind of stay on top of things. So now, over the years, even though it's always been a part of our strategy, updating content has become a much more important part of our strategy, I think, more recently. And I think going forward, it's the bulk of what we do is probably just going to be just trying to stack success on top of success and just optimize what we have. I don't think that you can ever run out of things to say. Like, I think that that's almost literally impossible if you have something that you're passionate about. But I think from a search perspective, though, and if we kind of think about, well, if that's the primary means of getting traffic, and what do people use search engines for? They use it to answer questions. You can reach a point where you've answered enough questions that you are probably driving as much traffic as what you really need to grow in the way that you want. And so you can reach a point where it doesn't make sense to keep adding new content when you could actually drive greater gains by optimizing what you have, especially if you're a small team. And so that's kind of the position that we're in right now. I think that updating, like, even if you are a newer company, even if you have a smaller blog, your greatest opportunities might actually be just optimizing what you've already got. It's really, really easy to kind of get stuck in this like mode of operation where you're just constantly thinking new and just constantly churning stuff out. And I think especially, I think as creative professionals, it's just very easy for us to just want to create and just make more stuff. But you'll kind of reach a point where you have to start to pivot, because you start to run into issues with content decay and, just having a website that's just larger than what you can afford to manage at a certain point too. So there's things to balance, but I would not I would not underestimate the power of just updating things and making things better for people.
We have seen great results from content updating as well for our clients. And it's really interesting every time we do a content update to see how much of an impact it can have. Obviously, sometimes some content updates are not as successful as others, obviously.
Right.
But I'm really fascinated when I see that, okay, this piece of content has started decaying when it comes to its performance, or maybe has reached a plateau, and just by updating it, boom, like an explosion. And it's really fascinating to see every time. And this is why we always push our clients as an agency towards that direction as well, because what's the point, as you correctly put it, what's the point of creating new content constantly while you have something there that you can update and get more results out of it. That was all very, very insightful. Before we go, I'd like to ask where people can find more about you if they want to get in touch, or CoSchedule. So please share the CTA for our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. So CoSchedule is pretty easy to find, just coschedule.com. You can learn everything that you could ever want to know about all of our products there. If you're looking for where I'm at, I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'm pretty open to, talking to whoever on those platforms. So definitely don't be afraid to follow, or send a connection request or anything like that, just to introduce yourself.
That's great. Ben, thank you very much for being with us. So
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.